That is why the first food is milk and something that they literally just have to suck and swallow. So to say that purees aren't texture is not true at all. Puree is a texture. Even milk has a texture. Baby-led weaning is not necessarily about giving your baby texture versus no texture. You are giving your texture when you feed your baby. It is just maybe giving your baby a bit more autonomy with the feeding. And I think I often see parents get very stressed when they've got to move away from those pureed veggies that their child was eating so beautifully because they've read somewhere, almost like you've seen on Instagram, a child holding a broccoli floret and holding a piece of butternut. And I'm saying, no, let them play with those whole veggie foods. I'm all for that. I want them to see them, smell them. But let them also just absolutely eat nutritionally from their purees. Hi everyone, and welcome back to Let's Talk Baby. I'm Kath Megaw. I'm a pediatric dietitian. We are so excited because we're doing this picky eating series. We get asked so many questions about picky eaters. I'm joined today by Sammy. She's our feed-in therapist, and I'm sure you learned a lot from her podcast last week where we discussed the different stages of feed-in. So hi, Sammy.
Hi, Kath. So I think today is going to be a great podcast because Kath is going to continue for us and maybe speak us or chat us through the food journey and what that entails when it comes to eating.
Yeah, so I think just like you explained so nicely to us that progress when a baby's born, and it was something I learned, which was just totally, it's a reflex initially, and then it becomes more voluntary and more something that they actually learn on how to do and how to suck. And I think, that is why the first food is milk. And the first food is something that they literally just have to suck and swallow. So they don't have to chew it. They don't have to do anything with it. So there's a reason why it is what it is. Obviously, when you start solids, it is that exact thing. It is solid. So whether you are choosing the baby-led wean-in route or whether you are choosing the more puree spoon route, your baby's going to experience a new texture in whatever way. So to say that purees aren't texture is not true at all. Puree is a texture. Even milk has a texture. So it's a new texture and your baby is advancing. It's not wrong to give puree. If you think about a lot of our foods that you and I eat today, they are puree, whether it's a yogurt or whether it's a porridge. Or you go to a fancy gourmet restaurant and they give you all these fancy purees and this very fine mashed potato. Exactly.
Yeah.
I think we have to be very careful that we don't like throw the baby out with the bathwater, as we say. But
Absolutely.
So baby-led weaning is not necessarily about giving your baby texture versus no texture. You are giving your baby texture when you feed your baby. It is just maybe giving your baby a bit more autonomy with the feeding. And I believe you can do that whether you're doing puree, handheld food, and I think you should be doing both because part of the food development is learning to enjoy all these different textures because some foods are needed to be in a more smoother puree form to get that sort of nutrition, and others are needed to be in a more handheld or cut up form to get that sort of nutrition. And so it's really important that you cross the different textures with your baby, whatever method you are calling it. You need to ensure that you have these variety and these textures in. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, it does. And I think that's why, we've mentioned in previous podcasts that we are big fans of the combination approach, where you're taking little bits from here and there, your traditional spoon feeding, which is predominantly puree, as well as your baby-led weaning, and actually, mixing it up a little bit to what suits your family.
Absolutely. And like you said on last week's podcast, when you get to a stage, and ideally We would love children to start eating adapted family meals from as soon as possible. And the adaptation will be dependent on where your baby is at developmentally in the feeding journey. So that
Absolutely.
is quite normal. So some babies might need to have purees predominantly in their diets a bit longer, and they prefer textures very separately. So they're quite happy to eat a piece of toast, chew on biltong, eat a meatball, but then they love their puree veggies. They don't want veggies in the veggie form because it's a bit mushy and they don't quite like that. They prefer the puree. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I think I often see parents get very stressed when
Yeah.
they've got to move away from those pureed veggies that their child was eating so beautifully because they've read somewhere, or most likely seen on Instagram, a child holding a broccoli floret and holding a piece of butternut.
Yeah.
And I'm saying, no, let them play with those whole veggie foods. I'm all for that. I want them to see them, smell them. But let them also just absolutely eat nutritionally from their purees. And just you mentioned, and maybe you could even just add a little insight here as well, is, there's a lot of concern around food progression versus ability to feed and speak. And so parents often panic because they think, my child's not getting textured food, so he's not going to learn to speak. But then when I do a food history, the child's eating baby biltong, chewing on toast, eating a scrambled egg, but they just like their veggies and their fruit purees.
Yeah.
Now, I want to know from your kind of expertise, am I right in saying that by having that variety of texture, they will progress, even if the texture's not mixed up altogether?
Absolutely. I think, we can't expect our little ones to all be the same. And yes, you get those adventurous foodies that will eat those sticks of broccoli and eat, whatever you put in front of them. And then you get the little ones that have their preference. And if you think of us as adults, we have preference.
Mm.
I don't like stews or mixed
Yeah.
textures like that. I like my things sort of separate, and that's okay. Why are we expecting our little ones or forcing them to like a certain, especially like a mixed texture, like you say, where that's not realistic, as long as they are, like you say, having their veggies, having mixed textures. Yes, if you've got a little one that only has puree, um, closer to a year, and you've tried different textures and they're not progressing, yes, then you're going to have to say, hold on, what's happening? But if your little one loves their mashed potato as opposed to potato chips, that is totally fine. You know what? The more variety and texture, the better, actually. Because even as adults, like you mentioned in the beginning, is we still have puree as adults in the form of soup, in the form of mashed potatoes. So yeah, why can't little ones, if they like their things a bit mushed? Absolutely. And I
And I
think I
think
always laugh. I have to say this, Kath, and I don't advocate for it, because please don't do it. Research shows better. But just in terms of the development, and if your little one is not progressing past puree at a certain point, they're not going to be able to speak, because that's a big concern I get asked all the time. My mom was death scared of choking and only started feeding me puree at a year. And I was able to speak. I am able to speak. So I think that you don't need to panic. I'm
and
not saying that that's the way to go, but
No, I
definitely.
hear you. Yeah, and I think I love that. I love that little anecdote. And I think we have to keep putting our kids' feeding in perspective. And that's what we're hoping to do on
Mm,
this journey that we're going to go through with you. And when we get down to some real like problems and how to fix them and how to
mm,
correct them. But we wanted to just start this with setting up expectations. What can you expect feeding development wise? What can you expect food progression wise? And I think what we're saying today is really that food is going to progress at the child's preference as well as their pace. So some
absolutely.
children will never want to pick rice out of mushed food, and
No.
others and will want their rice as rice and their meatballs as meatballs and their gravy separately. And there are adults that like to eat like that, and there's nothing wrong with
Nothing
it.
wrong. Mm.
So I think it's the thing is, are we getting in the good nutrition? Are they
Mm.
getting a variety of textures? They don't all have to be mushed all together. So,
Mm.
and I think that's very important because parents think if their children that can't manage to go onto the number 3, number 4, number 5 level in all these commercial foods, then there's something wrong with their child. But
Yeah,
then you look at it and their child is actually eating a range of different textures, just not all mushed together.
absolutely. Absolutely. Kath, thanks so much. I think that that helps to also manage expectations and actually just, I think there's a few parents that are now sighing a breath of relief to know that it's okay if their little ones prefer things a certain way, and they need to actually look at the overall picture rather than focusing, on those small nitty-gritty things that maybe they are seeing on Instagram or is advertised. Those stage foods drive me crazy.
Mm,
Um,
no,
and I think that's
absolutely.
a very important takeaway that you've mentioned today.
Yeah, so thanks, moms and dads, once again for listening. Tune in next week as we continue to unpack the picky eating journey. We look forward to doing these journeys with you. If you're a weaning parent, mom, or dad, and you are wanting to find out how to do the nitty gritty of weaning, please go back and have a look at our other podcasts where we've done a whole weaning series. Thanks so much.